Joy divine, oh joy divine, so simple and so hard to find. All loneliness and sorrow mends in the joy divine of friends. We're going to do that again. You're going to all join in. Ready? Joy divine, oh joy divine, so simple and so hard to find. Loneliness and sorrow mends in the joy divine of friends. Thank you, Marjorie, for being the glue that connects us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm here with author Sands Hall. She has written the book Flunk Start, Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Sands, before we talk about Scientology, what brought you into that? What were you before you went into Scientology?
Just such a great and vast question. Of course, in many ways, that's what the book is trying to explain to the reader. But largely, it is the fact that I grew up in a certain kind of family, and one of the things I'm trying to do in the book is sort of that lesson you learn when you read The Red Badge of Courage, and when you are 14 or something, and you understand that in the universe, in the specific lies the universal. So I'm very specific about my family, because I think that helps people to sort of ground themselves with their own families, and I'm hoping to create some sympathy. But the big thing, and some understanding, but the big thing that launched me into the Church of Scientology is I had an older brother who was he was 18 months older than I, and was sort of a mentor, leader, friend. He had moved to New York City to pursue theater, and I followed him to New York City because he was sort of paving the way. It was just what he did. And he had started a theater company, and I became up in upstate New York. There was a barn, and we actually made theater in this barn, and he was just a charismatic, enormous figure, which created a sort of almost cult-like thing around him as he created this theater company. And he was a very heavy drinker, and I had in many ways shaped my life in relationships. I think it's a funny thing that's sometimes untalked about siblings, where you are almost creating yourself in relationship to them.
Oh, sure.
And so he would drink anything, smoke anything, eat anything, screw anybody. I mean, he was just in this sort of, and it was the time period also. And I just sort of became this meditator in my little white clothes and drank a lot of chamomile tea, and then he, as a result of some stuff, went off a bridge up at where the theater company was located in upstate New York, and he basically lobotomized himself. And he was pronounced dead on arrival when he got to the hospital, but this doctor that knew him in the area shoved a tracheotomy into his throat and said, "Don't you die on me," and raced through the night to a hospital in Albany, and then he was transferred to Boston Gen, and so all of this stuff, and I just couldn't imagine my life without this brother. And all of a sudden, he was no longer my brother. And that was really hard to face. It was almost like, please, I'd rather deal with him dead in a funny way, horrible though that may be to say, than this completely changed person. He was, just not who he was. And I think the vertigo that was associated with that spun me really violently. It took me years to see this, I have to say. But I suddenly moved from New York to Los Angeles. I was pursuing my theater career. I was going to be on television, which people had told me I should do, blah, 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 blah. And then very, very quickly, I just found my way through a series of circumstances. The church just kind of enveloped me, and I think I jumped into it. I was very eager for its certainty.
So what was it about Scientology that drew you in?
Another great question. First of all, I was attracted by its orderliness. L. Ron Hubbard has now we find out he lied about absolutely everything, but he said he was an engineer, and so he would divide life processes up into these kind of doable ideas. He would take apart, he would say that the idea of understanding, for instance, is composed of affinity, reality, a shared reality, and communication, and that creates understanding. And so that kind of those kinds of things made sense. And so those sort of things that make sense began to be very appealing to me. And I had, of course, there was a gentleman involved, and he was a very handsome man and an incredibly talented jazz musician, had played with the likes of Chick Corea and stuff. And I think I fell in love with jazz as much as I fell in love with Jamie. And so that was a large part of it also. I was ready for that. It was that, I was 31, 32 years old. I was very ready for what that might be. So I kind of jumped in with both feet. But then it was also that Scientology addressed this idea that has long been intriguing to me, that we have a body, but we are a spirit. And that spirit actually, where Scientology is concerned, it comes back many, many lifetimes. And that's a very Eastern idea. More of the world believes in that idea than doesn't, if we count all the Eastern religions that take that into account. And so that kind of idea was tremendously appealing to me because I'd long had intrigued ideas. Why does that era fascinate me so much? And I have such strong affinities for that era, for instance. And then, of course, he also had this interesting thing of what the mind was in relationship to the spirit and the body. So he had a lot of stuff that was now I see it's available in many, many religions, and you can find it like probably a really deep, good psychology course plus, Buddhism might have given me some very similar things. But I was ready for above all, the scary thing, the certainty, the absolute, there's no other way. This is the only religion that will possibly take you where you need to go. And so because there were these things that made sense, you kind of begin to climb in there. I was reluctant at first, was like worried, but then, was more and more avid and eager. And then because you've accepted some things, it kind of gets hold of your brain, and then you're kind of skewed looking at other things. And that's the thing most people don't understand is how could someone bright, educated, with a wonderful family, how could you get involved, And that's why so many people do, because you're so intrigued by certain entry points that bring people in, and then all of a sudden, you're all of a sudden having to accept other things. And if you don't have high functioning critical skills, that critical thinking, which when I was growing up, no one really paid attention to that idea. Now we try to teach it. As a professor, I try to teach that idea. What verb is this person using to sway your perspective, i.e.,
How long were you in Scientology before you started to realize this may not be for me?
I think the horrible, horrible thing is the whole time.
Wow.
The whole time. That there was just this little, I called it the cat of doubt, that would just go, and sometimes hiss and sometimes yawn and be bored. And it would just it would come all the time. And then I would be grief-stricken because I couldn't be as thorough and as faithful as I felt I should be. And it was shutting off my brain. I had to shut off my brain. And that was the scariest thing. And I know I'm not unique in that. And I think that is, in many ways, the definition of a cult. That it allows you or forces you to be inside of this little circle. And you can't really look out of it. And if you do, it's like, and you close up again. So it was finally when I was accepted at the Iowa Writers Workshop and landed on that campus, and realized what I had not been doing for 7 years of my life, this potential for growth and learning and possibility, that I really went, this is just like Eve. I'm not supposed to be curious, that she was curious and then we've had a lot of trouble for women ever since, but that idea that if I can't be curious, I am not alive. And that was the beginning of the end.
Well, and you mentioned the Iowa Writers Workshop. There have been people who have launched themselves from Scientology, and we have seen the results. You say that you sidled out, and this Iowa Writers Workshop was your way to do that. You kind of slid out the side door.
I did.
Tell me about that.
Very purposefully, because the church, although it ignores it negates this and dismisses this all the time. It has a tremendously powerful policy of not being able, you can't be in touch with someone who is a Scientologist if you, it's not so much if you're not a Scientologist, but if you in any way, shape, or form deride it or dismiss it or criticize it. That is the line. And at that point, I really understood that even leaving it, and I think that was true then, I think they've had to kind of adjust that a little bit because so much attention's been paid to it. So I felt I had, one of the reasons I stayed in the church as long as I did, or the cult, whatever you call it, as long as I did, is because I had a wonderful circle of friends. I mean, if they were sitting in this room with us, we would be, you would love them. They were smart, great sense of humor, wonderful, compassionate people. We were all trying to just better ourselves and above all, better the planet. We wanted to have this better life for everyone. That we all were working on that. And so that made it increasingly hard to leave because it would mean turning my back on a group of people that I'd known for, at this point, 7 years. And so that made it really difficult. But by the time there was a huge geographical distance that Iowa gave me from Los Angeles. And that was tremendously important and vital in the ability. So yes, I sort of stepped away, and then little by little, I think I told a couple of the friends, but really what happened is through the grapevine, they understood that I was no longer involved, and we never talked. We never talked.
And have you talked to this day?
Yes, since we have. When the man that got me into Scientology died, I saw that, of all things, on Facebook, and I had just finished a first draft of the memoir, and I flew to LA to be at his memorial service inside of the Celebrity Center, which is where I'd done a lot of my work in the church, my classes and stuff, and I was with a whole bunch of people that we'd all been friends together. And at that moment, there was this effort, I think, for all of us to say, Sands is fine, we're all fine, let's just be friends. And then we were, and that we would be in touch, and we would write, and we would congratulate things on various things. Then I wrote the book. And then they basically said, one of them wrote to me and said, "You are cutting the line to us." And so I haven't even tried to be in touch with them since, because I don't want to go through whatever it would be,
We want to make sure to talk about the fact that this is coming out in paperback.
Yes.
Flunk Start, Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. It's coming out in paperback with a red cover, and it's being retitled with Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. Do you think that will, because Flunk Start is the vernacular of Scientology, and many people don't know that, do you think this will help gain more attention for the book?
Well, I think that is the hope of the sales team, the mysterious, mystical group called the sales team. They didn't really want it named Flunk Start in the first place. They felt it was a bit mysterious, and it is a phrase that's used in Scientology when you're drilling something and you're just following a policy letter by L. Ron Hubbard, and you don't do it right, and I say flunk and I say start. There's no animosity involved. It's just do it again, do it better. And it's a handy phrase. It's a very handy phrase, flunk, start. And I often think of Samuel Beckett's fail again, fail better, which is another version of that. But they didn't want to name it, and my editor, bless her heart, insisted that it be called that because that idea is woven through the book. The idea that we fail and we get up again, we fail and we get up again, which is ultimately what I learned from writing the book, which is so many of us have given part of our lives to something that we wish we hadn't, and it could be very easy to wallow in that regret, but then if you realize that, well, you wouldn't be where you are and doing what you are right now if you hadn't had those years and that regret. So that became something of the reclaiming my decade lost in Scientology was, and I love that word, it was suggested by my editor actually, that it's that sense of I can find my way to that decade that I've thought for years is being squandered and lost and wasted, and for a decade I didn't talk about a decade. For a whole decade, I didn't talk about a decade. No one knew. I moved to a small town in the Sierras of California and never talked about it. And so I think those sales have been robust, and the reviews we've received have been great. I think there's this effort with the book club group to get the title much more straightforwardly without the flunk start. So it's just going to be called Reclaiming My Decade Lost in Scientology. And as you yourself pointed out, it's that word, right? There's so many people who are engaged. In the current cover, you don't really see it's about Scientology. It's kind of hidden. I mean, it's a lovely cover, but that idea is hidden in the title. So I think this is an effort to say, this is what it's about. It's also so much more than that. It's about family, it's about loss, it's about regret, it's about how you recover life things, it's about siblings, it's about so much more. It's a very, I've had people write wonderful reviews about the necessary book for our time and stuff like that, but the issue that we hope get more readership for it and try to reach those people. I'd really like to read the book, especially those who are trying to leave any kind of situation that's difficult for them.
Sure.
I want to get to those people as well.
There are so many parallels just in life.
Yes.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
You have interviews, you've got all sorts of things coming up, and I want to make sure people can find out more. What's the website?
It's very easy, SandsHall.com.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sands.
thank you very much. Yeah.